It's not a curse being a highly sensitive person or even thinking that you are. Now, did you know that being a highly sensitive person is actually an adaptive personality trait and it's not a flaw? And in this video, you're gonna find out why. So stick with me and here we go. So the concept of highly sensitive people or person differs from being just overly emotional. So let's talk about some of those traits that make up highly sensitive people. First, we're talking about a heightened sensory processing individual. And this is an increased sensitivity to various stimuli. Now, not only your five senses, but also to your perception of various experiences and those around you. And this can really get played out because of past experiences that you've had that can influence not only how you respond, but certainly how you interpret various situations. Now, also, there's emotional intensity. Now, this is also something that we see in highly sensitive people because you experience emotions deeply and more intensely. Some folks may have said, oh, he or she is so emotional, da 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 da. But highly sensitive people, that emotional intensity can actually be a good thing because it helps you be certainly more aware. But we got to watch out for that distortion. That distortion could be from mental health concerns, depression, anxiety, PTSD, borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, whatever it may be. So being emotionally intense, so to speak, feeling it is understandable, and you have to be aware of that if you have that experience of emotions in a very deep and intense way. Now, another component is the depth of processing, and that is that you process information more deeply, which leads to richer inner experiences. And this can be that highly sensitive people really do benefit from meditation. They really can get a deep sense of calm and peace when they're able to control a lot of those distracting thoughts and visions. And by visions, I mean certainly memories or images of people and experiences you've had that pop in your head, and that depth of processing, because you can feel things and understand things at a deeper level. It's not a negative. And then lastly, the last component I want to talk about is that sensitivity to subtleties. Now, this is that you have the tendency to notice nuances in the environment. This is absolutely including emotions. And because of that heightened sensory processing, that emotional intensity that you experience, and that depth of processing, you are focusing on a lot of those subtleties. But do you recognize that those subtleties don't necessarily mean the totality of the experience you're in? So using that highly sensitive processing aspect of you, that it can help you understand situations better. But if you overreact to the nuances, you can actually lose the ability to manage many situations, because the nuances, even though to you they feel really intense and really big, they may not be. But again, we got to go back to that distortion. We got to challenge that distorted view. That's what I want you to be aware of. So let's talk about differences from being overly emotional and a highly sensitive person. Now let's talk about that sensory focus. Now, highly sensitive people have a sensitivity that extends beyond just emotions. This includes sensory experiences. So this is different than just being overly emotional. Oh, he or she is so emotional, because it's those senses, right? It's those five senses that you feel, and you feel them more intensely. It's this greater sense of awareness, which just being overly emotional, that's just focusing on one aspect. Now, also that emotional regulation. For highly sensitive people, they can often regulate their emotions despite the intensity. Whereas overly emotional individuals, they certainly struggle with that emotion regulation. And that's where dialectical behavioral therapy can be big help, because it's just working on that module, that emotion regulation module, understanding your emotions, managing your emotions. Now, even though you may feel it more intensely, highly sensitive people that don't also have BPD or NPD or other mental health concerns, and even if they do, of course, it depends upon the severity, but they don't always have that emotion dysregulation. So highly sensitive people recognize that, but they may not engage or get caught up in that emotional dysregulation. So that's just a little difference there. Another component is trait versus state. And this is being highly sensitive is a trait. It's something that you have across situations. It isn't state dependent. State dependent means that when you're in particular situations, that sensitivity kicks up. Now, you may feel it more intensely when you're around family, or you're around perhaps a partner that you don't trust, or a partner that maybe you feel like a little burned out on this relationship, I'm ready to move on, or things like that. That's more of a state. Trait is we see it across contexts, which means we see it across different environments. We see it across different people as well. So we get that greater sense. And when you're overly emotional, that is absolutely state dependent, because your emotions are highly dictated by the state that you're in, the situation that you're in. Your emotional state, whether it's high, low, could be overreactive, underreactive, whatever it is. So the situation dictates that. And that's what we see more in overly emotional people as opposed to highly sensitive. And lastly, adaptive functioning. Now, highly sensitive people, that sensitivity tends to serve an adaptive function, unlike being overly emotional, which can certainly hinder functioning. And when we talk about that adaptive function, what that means is that highly sensitive people are able to use their senses in order to determine the best outcome to get those needs met. Now remember, if you've seen my other videos, that I also talk about that life is not about guarantees, that it is very much about probability. If we engage in positive behavior, self-control, and assertiveness, not aggression, we increase the probability of positive outcome. When we engage in negative outcome, destructive behaviors, then increases the outcome of negative consequences. And that's not what we want. So it's all about managing those probabilities. And that's where highly sensitive people, that it is an adaptive trait. It is something that you can use to work for you, but you got to contend with that distortion. You got to contend with that BPD and family in the head that's bringing up the past, that you feel is like it's triggering yourself and driving you to engage in maladaptive behaviors to fulfill a pattern. And that can become really complex. That's where a good mental health provider can help you as well. That's really important. Now let's talk about the problem or challenge of being a highly sensitive person. And this is, we want to be aware of some of the struggles or challenges that you're going to have, that you face in the world around you, and that sometimes it can be overwhelming. Now, that sense of sensitivity overload, this is that highly sensitive people are really affected by loud noises, bright lights, or crowded environments. And this makes total sense because they're just more sensitive to what's going on around them. It's like a telescope, right? So you're looking through that telescope and you see, but in this case, let's say the average, the non-highly sensitive person, it's like an average telescope, but that highly sensitive person, their view is so much bigger. They're taking in more data. They're taking in more information. Their scent, their hearing, their taste is more intense than the average person. And that's what we're talking about here. That can certainly be a challenge. And if you're a highly sensitive person, you need to be aware of it. Deeply emotional responses. And this goes back to what we were talking about when we were talking about aspects of highly sensitive people, is that, again, you experience emotions more intensely, which can, of course, increase the probability of feeling overwhelmed. And what do you do when you feel overwhelmed? Because highly sensitive people are at a higher likelihood to feel overwhelmed by their emotions, by the stimuli in various situations. So if you know that you're a highly sensitive person, you're going to need to take little mental breaks. And I already talked about how doing meditation can really help. Because, again, you're going to be more sensitive to that meditation, to that process, which means, bonus, that the payoff is even better for you. Now next, let's talk about that heightened sensory awareness. And we talked about that you're at a higher likelihood to notice some of those subtle textures, scents, and tastes more acutely. But again, what happens if there are too many at one time? It goes back to that feeling of overwhelmed. It's hard to discern various experiences in your life because they all can get slammed together. It's like fruit salad time. And when you're eating the fruit salad, you really just want to taste the strawberries, but the strawberries are in there with the grapes, and they're in there with the cantaloupe, and they're in there with everything else. And you're like, well, I can't really taste the strawberries because everything is in there. And then you got the fruit juice, it's in there too. So all of that, that's like that highly sensitive awareness and you're trying to tease that out, you can train yourself to better focus so that when you do have the fruit salad, you can taste the strawberries. You absolutely can. It takes, again, meditation, mindfulness, focusing. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So what about that empathic burden? A lot of highly sensitive people do talk about having this sense of burden with their emotions, that sometimes they absorb other people's emotions more deeply, which can tire you out. That can lead to emotional fatigue, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And you gotta be aware of that. Remember that you want to focus on the distance between you and others. And you have to keep that separate. Sometimes when people tell you about experiences that they've had, that can be really impactful for a highly sensitive person. So you need to have that sense of awareness, especially if it's a very traumatic story or a very intensive story. So be aware that you are at a higher likelihood to really be empathic, and that's going to increase the probability of feeling overwhelmed, which increases the probability of emotional fatigue. Now, need for solitude. This is really important because I've noticed, and please leave this in the comments too, that a lot of highly sensitive people that I work with, that a lot of them tend to be very extroverted because some of them, many of them, get a lot of energy from being around others. And that energy, though, because they're taking in all this stimuli, then goes back to emotional fatigue, feeling overwhelmed, all those factors. So if you feel that you're a highly sensitive person, that it requires frequent alone time to recharge from external stimuli, you're going to need that meditation time. Yoga is fantastic. And even working out, right? Turn your phone off, turn the cellular part off, just listen to your music and work out, exercise, walk your dog, whatever, watch your fish, whatever you're into, people watch, whatever it may be. But do those things. You're going to need solitude. It doesn't have to be you alone in a room where you're like, man, the only way I feel better is in solitude, but you don't because you're extroverted, and that becomes the paradox. It doesn't have to do that, to be like that. You can instead go somewhere, again, you can go to the gym, you can go to a coffee shop, just sit and just chill. Don't play on your phone or anything like that. You're just sitting there, you're just drinking your Americano. I love a good Americano. I do. And you just sit there and you just have your drink and you just kind of people watch and you just chill. Don't go on your phone, don't look at Instagram, social media. You're going to go back to that sense of overwhelm. You need more solitude and peace. Now, we also have to recognize that there is a sensitivity to criticism. And this is that tendency to react more strongly to negative feedback or criticism from others. And that makes total sense because, again, you're going to take in that information. And before I get to the but, it's the distortion that's going to be adding to that criticism, that self-talk, that negative self-talk that taps into your sense of awareness. And we have to be aware of that. Again, if you have control of that distortion and you can see yourself and others more accurately, you're better able to take feedback more effectively and not misinterpret it as criticism. And there is an absolute difference. There can also be issues with decision making. So there are decision making challenges here too, which is that you struggle to make choices due to the thorough analysis of your options. A lot of times those highly sensitive people really get overwhelmed, not only because they're taking in all of this information. Remember, it's just not emotional. It's those other aspects as well. So to take all of that in, that level of analysis can be really difficult, and using that data to make the best decision for yourself can absolutely be overwhelming. And then boundary difficulties. A lot of highly sensitive people do find it difficult to set boundaries and assert personal limits. And that can be because of how empathetic they are. That can be because of their degree of connection. It can be because of this higher probability to be extroverted and connect to others. So we have to be aware of those factors as well and setting good boundaries, which means that during periods of solitude or self-exploration, it's looking into those aspects of yourself, what you'll tolerate and what you won't, but also knowing that sensitivity level, knowing when you're starting to get overwhelmed and managing that more effectively. It can be really important for you too. And then pursuit of perfectionism. Now, a lot of highly sensitive people do aim for perfection due to that sensitivity to the smaller aspects and details. Because when we pay attention to the smaller details, then we're able to actually create greater pictures, portraits, aspects of our life, and we're able to see more. But when we add a level of perfection, which is that in order for something to be good, beneficial, happy, and this can be in relationships, this can be in child rearing, this can be as a child or a parent, whatever it may be. But you have these ideas and they feel so intense. And that can be a sense of perfection because you feel like, well, it has to be like I imagine it. And if it isn't, then it's a failure. And that goes to conceptualization. So you can use that sensitivity to look at various situations, but don't overanalyze it and take it in and say it has to be this way, because it's that staunch approach to your perspectives in your life that can really stress you out and cause a lot of problems, certainly in your relationship, how you see yourself, but also in relationship with others as well. Let's just talk about some positives. Let's end here on a positive note of highly sensitive people, which is this enhanced empathy. And again, just as I mentioned, it's an ability to deeply understand and connect to others' emotions. And you can absolutely use that to your advantage. There's also heightened intuition, is that you can use that being highly sensitive aspect of yourself to build your insights and really listen to that gut feeling that can help you decide decision making, but be aware of that distortion tendency. And then creative expression. Rich inner world can foster an external experience. It can really foster creativity in various forms and expression. If you're a highly sensitive person, I encourage you just to draw or paint or do something to get that out. It can be really helpful because that attention to detail can really help you have a greater experience in your life and understand more about what goes on in your life and help you process it more effectively. That can be really great. And lastly, that emotional depth, that it's the rich emotional experiences that contribute to this real fulfilling inner life that you have, and it's managing all of that sensory information, all of that sensory data. But it makes life a richer life, particularly when you can control the distortions. You have a sense of when you're getting overwhelmed, when you're getting fatigued. Use that highly sensitive nature that you have to your advantage to move you forward. Pay attention to your gut. Be aware of that distortion. And as you do that, you will find that you have a greater sense of control, that it impacts your decision making in a positive way. And that's what we want. That's my hope for you in this video, that you're able to use this information to go forward. So please leave a comment. Let me know if you feel you're a highly sensitive person. If you're interested, I do evaluations to determine highly sensitive people. So reach out to me and perhaps we can do that. If you look on my website, you'll find more information about how to contact me about that. And thank you very much for your time. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.